This is pink, a color used in some of the most popular companies and apps in existence, and some of the strongest color symbolism in the world. And it doesn't even exist. And I can prove it with this, the electromagnetic spectrum. All the colors we see are part of this visible light spectrum, with red all the way to the left side and purple all the way to the right. Within the two lies every possible color we can see, and all the connotations and emotions they carry with us. Except pink is nowhere. It doesn't show up here. In fact, the only place pink exists on the color wheel is right here, right in between red and purple, which are on the two opposite ends of the spectrum. There shouldn't even be a color here. There should just be a hole. So how exactly do we see it? And more importantly, what can we learn from it? To understand all this, we need to start with how we see color. After Isaac Newton went and showed that white light is made up of a bunch of colors through the use of a funny-looking glass object, he made a tool to simplify organizing all these fancy colors called the Newton disk, or as we know it, the color wheel. And as you'll notice, even though red and purple are placed right next to each other, pink is nowhere on this disk. But that's because this was just the starting point. Newton's discovery was the first in a long chain of events that would create color theory as we know it today, and eventually the anomaly of the color pink. We just have to wait around 100 years. For the next 100 years, Newton's disk and primitive color wheel was good enough for the vast majority of people, except for one man, Hermann von Helmholtz. He wanted to know how exactly color existed, and probably had the same question as us: what the heck is pink? So through a lot of collaboration with colleagues and hard work, he eventually came up with the most influential theory in color history: trichromaticism. This trichromatic theory explained that while Newton was correct, he was also really wrong, because what Newton thought was that colors existed physically in the outside world. But what Helmholtz realized is that they don't. They are all just made up by our brain. Humans perceive color through 3 types of cone cells in the retina, sensitive to 3 different kinds of light: red, green, and blue. Because of his theory, these colors eventually became known as the primary colors of light. With just these 3 colors, you could make every other color in the world. Fast forward to the 20th century, and the rise of industrialization and printing led to the need for a standardized way to reproduce colors accurately. Adding exact amounts of red or blue or green to an image was proving to be too much of a hassle, which gave birth to the second most dominant system, the subtractive system. This was the birth of color systems like CMY and later CMYK, which was developed for color printing. Unlike the RGB system used for light, CMYK is a subtractive color model, meaning the more color you add, the closer you get to black, as it subtracts brightness from the white paper. This also explains why RGB was called additive, as the more colors you add, the closer you get it to white. Except, pause. Let's take a closer look at RGB, because this is where we come close to answering our first question: how pink exists in the first place. Speaking of, thanks so much for all the support on the channel lately. It really means a lot, and I want to give something back to you guys. So do you need a job? That sounded a bit weird. But whether you're a UX designer, app developer, freelancer, or just a curious viewer, I want to get to know you guys, share some UX and UI tips, and maybe even get a gig. So I made a Telegram group for us and want to make this the place to be for front-end professionals. And I'm having talks with people to get some employers in there so you can connect with them too and find some jobs in the future. I'm really excited to get this thing started, so I hope you'll join me. In 1996, some very small tech companies called HP and Microsoft wanted to better computers, and one way to do that was to standardize all the colors. This was, however, a little bit hard, since there's only just an infinite amount of colors that exist. So to solve this problem, they created sRGB, which stands for Standard Red, Green, Blue. sRGB actually defines a relatively narrow color gamut that aligns closely with what we see in typical indoor lighting conditions, which means that it tosses out a bunch of colors for the sake of standardization. This made it really ideal for everyday use: web content, social media, and most consumer devices. And if we look at something called the color gamut, i.e. every color that can exist, we'll see that sRGB is surrounded by this triangle, which represents every color that sRGB can output, and every color that can't. Except look at the bottom right section of this triangle. There it is, pink. So it does exist. Or does it? Because remember, RGB is an additive color system, meaning that every color here can be made from adding just 3 colors together: red, green, and blue in varying amounts. And if you add all the red, some green, and a little more blue, you get the default pink. RGB 255, 192, 203. So that's all pink is, an addition of colors. Or a subtraction of colors if you take the subtractive color approach, like how CMYK does. So that answers our first question. Pink doesn't exist in the real world. It's just a Frankenstein color that we somehow came up with. But here's where things get interesting, because colors mean something to people, right? Blue means sad, red means angry, blah blah blah, but where exactly does pink lie in this spectrum? In fact, why do we think blue means sad anyways? You might think the answer is easy. Blue only means sad because it just is sad, and pink only means girly stuff because, come on, Barbie is pink, isn't she? But that's actually wrong. Blue meaning sadness didn't come out of nowhere. It only has that meaning because back in the day, when a ship sailed back to port, a blue flag flying would mean that they'd lost a crew member or lost its captain at sea. But it can also inspire feelings of calm, trust, and reliability. That's why tech companies like Facebook and LinkedIn use blue in their branding. It reassures users and builds credibility. Same thing with red, a color known to evoke strong emotions. But its connotation didn't come out of a historical thing. It came out of the natural world, where blood is red, fire is red, and some poisonous animals are red. And then we come to pink. Pink has had a fascinating journey throughout history. In fact, it wasn't always associated with femininity. In the 18th century, pink was considered a color of power and masculinity, often worn by men of high status. Pink was bold, elegant, and widely used in fashion and art. Except I lied, because while colors themselves are just objective things that exist, they don't actually exist in the exact same way, and pink is the perfect way to understand that. Cultural context plays a significant role in how colors are interpreted. What may symbolize positivity in one culture might mean something entirely different in another. Take the color white, for example. In many Western cultures, white represents purity, cleanliness, and simplicity. That's why it's used in branding for health, wellness, or minimalistic websites. However, in some Asian cultures, white is associated with mourning and death. You've got to be really aware of this when you're out and about, or designing an app or website, or else you might confuse or even offend people if you're not careful. Similarly, red in Western cultures can symbolize passion or danger, while in countries like China, red is a color of luck, prosperity, and celebration. This is where companies and web designers have started to realize something interesting. Certain colors are safer than others. Brands that cater to international markets, like Coca-Cola, strategically use red in their design to maintain a consistent message across different cultures. And pink? Well, pink represents women, love, and romance. In the West, go to Japan and they represent the sakura blossoms, youth, and innocence. Go over to India and it represents festivities and masculinity. In China, it symbolizes prosperity as a lighter version of red. Latin America views it as neutral and inoffensive, while in the Middle East, it's sometimes seen as a color of luxury and sophistication. Which leads us to a natural question. How do web designers manage all these different color meanings in their apps that are used around the world? The best way to do this is to just pick colors that don't quite mean anything, or as Coke does, a color that means roughly the same thing around the world: neutral colors. These colors tend to have fewer strong cultural connotations and are generally perceived positively across most regions. Brands like Facebook and Twitter rely heavily on blue because it symbolizes trust and reliability across the globe. But for secondary elements like buttons, icons, or accents, designers can tweak color palettes to better align with local preferences. Additionally, there's just a lot of trial and error, and sometimes making people angry. A/B testing is a powerful tool for seeing how users in different regions respond to various color schemes. And it happens all the time where web designers will tweak a color here or there on a website and see which version performs better based on user interaction. And here we see everything we can learn about the color pink. Because it's not just a color that doesn't exist, it's a color with a billion different meanings. You see a bunch of websites in the West that use pink for femininity, but you also see websites that use it to evoke a friendly atmosphere, or just to soften the load of information. And in today's tech-forward world, pink intersects with innovation. Look at brands like Lyft, Instagram, and T-Mobile, companies that have embraced pink not just as a design choice, but as part of their brand identity. It's bold, fresh, and in the right context, it becomes the very face of technology. So, what did we learn today? Well, that pink doesn't exist. Sort of. And that colors can mean very different things to different people. But it's more than that. The pink paradox reminds us that color, though sometimes scientifically impossible, wields tremendous power over our perceptions. And sometimes it's the things that don't exist that hold the most meaning to us. Thanks for watching.